back to Woman at the Wheel. I'm Sue, and this segment I'm going to be basically talking about my continuing saga here. It's kind of turning into a little melodrama, I think. So we've been through the initial event with the Carrington type event, and we've been through a month out. Now we're 6 months out. So I'm going to kind of pick it up from here and let you know what's happened in the last 6 months since all this happened, the last 5 months since I talked to you last. So as it turns out, we've managed to save some of our technology, and this red truck being one of them. And so I'm back in the trucking business, and as I kind of figured, my nephew is riding shotgun for me, and we've actually successfully gone out and brought back a lot of stuff that people need, and some of it we just went and got because it was sitting abandoned, and others we had to barter for. So we've kind of begged, stolen, and borrowed different stuff to help our people out at home, and it's all going pretty well. One of the biggest challenges when we first started running this truck, once my diesel ran out that I've got loaded on the truck, was refilling the tank on the back of it. So we figured out a way to do that. We've actually got a pump. We have to pump it by hand basically, but we can open up any diesel port at any diesel stop, any diesel gas station. We can pump it out of there, and what I do is I treat it with Hot Shot Secret before I ever pump it into the truck, because it's been sitting a while now. So it's maybe a little on the stale side, but it's still running, so we're in business anyway. I don't know how much mileage I've put on the truck, because one of the computers that got fried ran my speedometer and my odometer, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's not like there's anybody out here checking us, or I'm not doing logs anymore. I quit doing logs when I started back out with this. I took my logbook with me for a while, and then I realized that nobody was going to inspect me because there was no infrastructure left for all that stuff. I haven't seen a weigh station open in 6 months, so they're kind of history right now. I think all the people that used to work at them, they were like, well, I can't get to work because my car won't go that far, or I don't have a car anymore, I'm not going to walk that far. There's no trucks running, so what's the point? So everybody just kind of abandoned the weigh stations. So those are basically a thing of the past, but what they are is they're a good place to stop and sleep for the night if you don't have any place else to go. Because they actually, do have some facilities there. So the people that are out doing trucking now, we've met pretty much everybody in the region who's got a running truck. And I feel really lucky because I got one of the bigger trucks as far as what's out here. And it's not as big as the Dodge, of course, but there was no saving the Dodge. The Dodge was completely fried. It actually melted some of the components. It just cooked them but good without setting it on fire. But this one it wasn't so computer heavy, so our mechanic friend was able to bypass what did get fried. He had to do a little bit more work on it, had to tweak it around. It took him a while. I think the last time I talked to you was a month after it happened. And at that point, I didn't know yet if it was going to ever run again. Well, it took another month to get it up and running after that. It was kind of bad news, good news, bad news. And, well, it kept going like that for a while. And then, so here we are today, we're out and running. So I've figured out a system for trailers. Basically, trailers are sitting around and they're there for the taking. So nobody's got vehicles to pull them anymore. So if I see something I like, I basically lift it up off the vehicle it's attached to, especially if it's empty. I usually don't mess with trailers that have stuff in them if it's gone bad. If it's something useful, I'll go ahead and hitch onto it and take that back. I've got quite a bit of goods that way. The biggest find that we had, amazingly enough, was engine blocks. I came upon a enclosed cargo trailer. It was padlocked shut. It was pretty heavy, but I ended up dragging it home. I wasn't very far from home. I think it was about 60 miles out. Dragged it home, and busted the lock off the thing. I didn't care what was in it at that point. It was heavy enough. There was something in there somebody might could use. So, and I was close enough to home. So I dragged it home. They busted the lock off, and there were engine blocks and other assorted parts, some exhaust parts, things like that. Things that were actually kind of useful on these cars they're trying to get running again. They're trying to bypass all the cook technology on some of the older ones, like this one. You know, the 80s and 90s models that didn't get completely fried. So we actually have quite a few running vehicles now in the community. I think there's got to be at least 40 or 50 of us that have something that's up and running. So we were able to actually fix up one of the old fire trucks. I went and scavenged some parts. That was one of the things I do now. And you don't just go to the store or go to a factory and pick stuff up. You have to go scavenge. So we scavenged some parts out of a fire truck that was stuck in a firehouse down south. And they gave me a list, and so I took a couple extra guys with me on that one. And we went down and we scavenged parts off of it and brought them back. So we actually have an operating fire truck in our district now. So that was pretty awesome. That was a pretty amazing deal. It's old. It's an old fire truck, but it works, you know. So that was something cool. The other thing we were able to do was we were able to locate a couple of buses that needed just a little bit of work, and of course you can't just bring stuff home. I had to take my guys to them, so I took my guys to the buses, had them work on them to get them running, and then we brought them back home. So now we have school buses for the kids that live out farther, you know, because a lot of their parents don't have vehicles anymore. A lot of kids are riding horses. There's a lot of horseback traffic, and so on the sides of the road, it's kind of interesting. Like down the median on the divided highways, that's horse territory now. Those are horse trails. So it's easier on their feet than running up here on the asphalt. So you got to kind of watch when you're out driving around, because you got a lot of pedestrian and horse traffic, and bicycles and motorcycles, lots of little stuff. So it's things are kind of getting back to normal in that sense, in that way. People are getting around doing what they need to do, and they've found ways to do it. You know, they've just adapted to the situation. It's really kind of nice to know that we're at least relatively adaptable as a species. So we're into summer now. Last time I talked to you was like October, I think, the end of October. So it's like the end of April now, and so we actually made it through the winter and didn't starve to death, and we were really lucky. We came across a couple of lucky finds. One of them was, shockingly enough, we found a trailer full of MREs out on the road, and we brought those back. So those helped supplement, especially for the people who couldn't get out and do any hunting or something. So we had that, and we found a couple other trailers that had like canned goods and stuff in them, just on the side of the road that somebody had overlooked, or they were out far enough that they didn't get, you know, scavenged before. So we were really lucky that way. I'm talking tractor trailers. So I made a couple of trips back to those with my enclosed cargo trailer. Somebody had found those, and they sent us out, so we knew what we were going after. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on like that helped us get through the winter. Now that we're into like the end of April, people have got their gardens in already. We had a really mild spring, which was nice for a change, because we've had a few where you couldn't even get stuff in the ground until, you know, the end of May. But it's already in the 70s every day. So we figure we're probably good. We have no idea of knowing really what kind of weather is coming. So all the weather warning system and everything, that's kind of useless. So we just do it the old-fashioned way. We stick our head out the window and look. But it's you know, the temperature's good for planting. So we've got everything planted. The early crops we got in, like the fall stuff last year, we planted a lot of carrots, stuff like that, the root things. And, you know, so those were we're getting into those now. And cabbage and stuff, that's all coming along real nice, all the cooler weather crops. So we're having a lot of hope that it's going to be a lot easier this year than it was last year, because everybody in town, instead of having lawns now, everybody's got gardens. So, you know, all the little old ladies in town who got, you know, their vegetable gardens growing, they remember how to do this stuff. When they were kids, they did the same thing. And we've basically ransacked for seeds. We've been up and down every which way looking at every, you know, farm supply store in the country, and we found a few seeds here and there, and some potato starts and stuff. So we actually scraped together enough that we got everybody a little bit, and then everybody's, of course, learning how to save their seeds and stuff. So we're learning. One of the books actually that has helped us the most, it was a series of books. It's called Foxfire, I think. It's either Foxfire or Firefox. I think it's Foxfire. But they're books written from how people were surviving in the Appalachian Mountains for the last couple of hundred years, and they were written in the 70s. And it was a really popular series, so we had a couple of them at the house, and a few people around town had some of them. And the ones we didn't have, we found at the library. So we set it up where we have a loan system on these books, and if you don't bring them back, we'll come hunting them because they're that valuable to us now. They're worth their weight in gold. And there are a couple ladies in town who actually have gone through them and written down the instructions for particular stuff, skipping over the anecdotal stuff in it, but writing down practical instructions for doing stuff in recipes and things like that. So we're kind of distributing that out to people who haven't been able to get in or who don't want to sit and read the whole book. But we're getting the information out there, but it takes a long time to make copies. You know, you can only make 3 or 4 copies with carbon paper, and we actually came upon a hoard of carbon paper. I don't remember if it was a newspaper office or somewhere, but somebody found like a stack of carbon paper, so we just stacked it in between typewriter paper. You know, you have to really press hard, but so we've been making copies of stuff that way to disseminate. And so, you know, there's information is being shared anyway. It's slow. It's nothing like what we used to be used to, but we're kind of used to this now. It's not so bad. I mean, most of us, well, especially those of us living out in the country, have running water boats pumped in, pump water in the sink, but I mean, that's as close to running water as anybody's got. They were able to get the town's water system kind of adapted to where people could go out and set a pump in the yard. So they've been setting pumps in the yards for people, like 2 or 3 to a block. And so people can go out and pump their water that they need for cooking or cleaning or whatever. Don't have to walk very far with it. So that's kind of been a good thing. The city actually pitched in and did all that, and I'm not sure where they got all the hand pumps to do it, but somebody found a stock of hand pumps somewhere and brought them in. And I'm not sure. It was just one of those deals. They just showed up. So the city government is basically our go-to government right now. The county government is like, I don't know, they're a little more far removed. They're not really as directly related to our lives, except for the deputies. We still get deputies patrolling on horseback and in vehicles now. They've got some more vehicles, and we've got more telephones back online. We've got quite a few, actually. I think, you know, we've got enough now where pretty much if you aren't within a mile or so of a telephone and you're within 4 or 5 miles of town, then you know, you should be within a mile of a phone, basically. One of the things that they've been doing too is they've been going in and reinstalling phone boxes. Like they used to have, somebody found a stash of phones somewhere. I think it was at the telephone company building. It was just a bunch of old phones, and they converted them into phone boxes, basically by just building a box around it and then running the wires up off the line on the side of the road. So every once in a while we have one of those, and it's always a party line. We don't have individual lines anymore, but at least you can get the ambulance or the sheriff on the line. Or if you got something really important, you can run it through the operator, and she can relay a message for you. Like if somebody's missing or something like that, didn't come home in time or whatever. You know, she's willing to do that, but they do kind of pick and choose which messages get delivered because it's still kind of a shaky system. So it's not like it used to be where you just pick up a phone and call anybody you wanted to. It doesn't work that way anymore. You pick up the phone and you dial 0 and you get the operator and you tell her what you need. And if it's the police or something, she'll directly connect you. They got a couple of doctors that they can directly connect you to, things like that. Some of the essential vet people like that, you know, you have to have an emergency. But as far as like, you know, calling your neighbor and shooting the breeze, we don't do that anymore. That's a thing of the past. But it's just amazing to me that they could get that technology working again, as long as some of those lines have been in the ground in as bad a shape as they were in. But they put the telephone guys, the local telephone guys, had all this stuff stockpiled down in the phone company building. My dad worked out of that building when I was a little kid, so I know there's stuff stored in there. It goes back at least to the 60s and probably a lot earlier, because I think that building was built in the 30s. So there's no telling what kind of old parts they found in there. But they found enough to get a rudimentary telephone system up and working. So if you've got an emergency, you don't have more than a mile to go to get to an emergency phone. So, you know, it's kind of a cool deal. It's about the best we can do. So one of the things we've seen too that's gone on, a lot of our nurses have opened up what do you call it, midwife practices. So because a lot of these ladies don't have the wherewithal to get to town or whatever when it's time for their baby, so they're basically working with local midwives. And the midwives, of course, can get a hold of the operator if they, you know, have a phone nearby. They can get a hold of the operator and talk to a doctor if they have something weird going on, or they can call for emergency services. But nowadays, most people are born at home, kind of like it used to be. You know, nobody's going into the hospitals anymore. Hospitals, as it turns out, are basically kind of useless as hospitals right now, because all of the electronic stuff in them, I mean, the whole building it requires electricity to make it habitable to where you can even stand to be in there, because it's such a closed system. So for now, it's just kind of sitting empty. Nobody's really messing with it too much. Of course, they've salvaged everything out of there that they can get that might be helpful to people. They've got all the beds and all that. So people in the community that like need a hospital bed or something, we were able to kind of spread those around, because we had some elderly people. One of the things that happened is we had to close down the nursing homes. So all these people had to go someplace, and we just went in and wheeled them out and wheeled them home to their family. And the people that didn't have family were adopted by, you know, people in the community. So that's something that I thought was really cool. You know, people that they didn't even know these people really, but they knew they needed a place, so they brought them home. And you know, that took a lot of dedication. And then the nurses' aides from all the nursing homes, we found them a vehicle, and they got to be our traveling home health people. They kind of picked up and ran with that. And then we've got some home health nurses that trained them, and they're working with them. So for all these people that were adopted out, and we had one requirement on that: they had to stay in the city limits, because we didn't want to be sending our nurses all over the place. And anybody who has to have that kind of deal gets adopted into a family in town. So everybody's got a place. It's really kind of a neat thing. It kind of makes you proud of humanity, the way people have done. But our priorities have changed entirely. Nobody's thinking about, oh, I got to get up and go to work, or oh, I've got to get up and do this, or do that, or I got to get on the internet and do this chat. You don't even hear that stuff anymore. Nobody even talks about it anymore. We did for like the first 3 months, and after that it was like, well, it's gone, so just forget about it. And so we've just kind of focused on what we need to do. and not worrying so much about what used to be, because it's not anymore. It's not ever going to be, not in our lifetime anyway. We've gotten some more news since I talked to you last too. We've had actually, we've got a guy here in town who's a ham operator, and it took him a little longer to get his radio up and running. Some of his parts got fried and he had to find replacements, and he actually constructed some replacements. He learned how to solder with a gas torch and repaired some of his stuff. And he built some new components. He's pretty sharp with it. And he was able to get that up and running. Well, it turns out that my nephew my niece's husband, he's my nephew by marriage, up in Colorado, his radio set survived. And so he's been kind of coordinating things up there. And they live in Maybell. So they're way in the hell out there. And they've actually done really well, as it turns out. So my nephew talks to our radio guy in Marlow, and he gives me messages on how my family's doing up in northwest Colorado, because, you know, God only knows when I'll get up there to see him again. But that's one of the things I'm looking forward to this summer. Once the passes once the possibility of snow is gone, I'm going to go up there and see them, and maybe see if they want to come back down here. I don't know. They may not. They're doing pretty well up there. And who knows, I may decide, you know, that we need to go up there too, but me and Bill are going to go do that. We'll have somebody come take care of all the livestock. We don't just have chickens anymore. We kind of went hog wild, and we got a pig, and then we got another pig. So we got a couple of hogs that we're feeding up, and we got some steers that we're feeding up out in the pasture. We've only got 12 acres, so we can't put a whole bunch of livestock on it, but we've got that. And then the chickens finally decided to go broody and sit on some eggs. So here just last week we had about 14 eggs hatched. So we'll have to see what they turn out to be. I don't know how many are hens and how many are roosters, and how many will survive, but we'll see. So Jack is walking around as proud as a peacock. You would think he was a peacock now instead of a rooster, but boy, he's still handsome, and fatherhood seems to agree with him. Now he's got a whole flock of, you know, little babies to guard, and boy, he's on alert. So things have changed that way. I never thought I wanted to, you know, raise animals for meat, but these days you kind of have to. It's either that or you're going to be hungry. So what we've kind of done as a community, because we don't have a lot of ways to keep a lot of meat, we've got some freezers up and going on propane. Bill was able to rig a few, and they're pretty reliable. We haven't had any problems with them. I mean, if you run out of propane, you're out of luck, but we know where to get more propane, so we're kind of lucky with that. We can actually go and get full propane tanks that people have abandoned because they don't know any better, and we can just bring them in and set them in place for people. So, you know, at some of these businesses and stuff that have propane tanks that aren't in business anymore. So we've gone in and talked to the people, you know, like, well, we need your propane tank. Sometimes the people are long gone too. I don't know what happened to them. Some people did leave. I mean, some people just packed up what they could carry or what they could stick in their little old car or whatever they had running, or on the back of a motorcycle, and just left. You know, that was just like, I guess they wanted to just go see what was going on. And so we had quite a few people left. We had some new people come in, and so they kind of got shuffled over to where the people who left from, you know, because they're housing and everything. So it's kind of stayed a static population. It hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, we still have people that get old and die, and we still have babies being born. So, but all that's happening locally now instead of happening on a broader scale from our perspective. But I was going to tell you the news. I keep getting sidetracked. So there's a lot. I mean, it's been a lot going on the last few months. So we finally heard from Washington, and evidently it got Washington too. It got the whole country. So there was nothing anywhere in the country that wasn't affected to some degree. Some places got it worse than others, oddly enough, because you would think it would just hit all the same everywhere, but I think it had to do with the structure of the buildings and stuff. So actually some of the technology stuff survived in some of the bigger buildings in the bigger cities, like where, you know, the way underground, or it was in, you know, on the ground floor of a multi-level building or something in the center, or well, whatever. Some of the stuff survived. The grid itself is completely shot, and there's no saving that. And what Washington came out and said, they actually sent out a news flyer that was about the only way they could do it, and they actually sent people out to distribute these all over the country. Somebody back there has an old-fashioned printing press, and they got it going. And so they've been going from printing press to printing press, and evidently there's quite a few. One of my sisters has one, as a matter of fact. And I don't know, I haven't heard anything from her yet, but she was living out in D.C. last I heard. I'm assuming that her man, who was in Lubbock at the time, has already headed out that way to go fetch her, since I haven't heard anything. And I wouldn't have expected him to come through Marlow to tell me, because, you know, he might not have been able to get up here or whatever. He was probably trying to make the shortest, straightest route, not to waste any fuel or any time. So I imagine he was probably on a motorcycle, would be my best guess. So I imagine he went out to get her. So I'm kind of halfway expecting to hear from them at some point. And the mail is actually starting to run again in local areas. It's not like nationwide yet, but it's little. The city post office here has opened up, and they're doing local mail deliveries. So you can still mail things locally, like, you know, from here to Duncan or from here to Lawton. They've got little close routes set up, and then they can relay it from those areas on over. So it's starting to get back. It might take you 3 or 4 months to get a letter from back east, but it's actually getting to the point now where stuff is moving again. So they've got that going again. But anyway, this newsletter that the feds sent out to us, which there aren't very many feds left. I mean, we still technically have senators and congressmen and all that, and a president, and we don't have the same president though that we had when this happened. So that's part of the big news. President Biden left. He became ill and he left the office, and Vice President Harris, she was distraught about all that happened, so she decided she was going to go back to, I think she's from California or somewhere. She was going to leave and just leave. She didn't want to stay here. And then she's got family, I guess, somewhere else, but she was going to go try and find her family. So we basically, I hate to say this, but we have President Pelosi now. Fortunately, in my opinion, she can't do too much harm because she doesn't have very much power anymore, but she actually had the presence of mind to send out a newsletter to tell us all this. So I thought that was hilarious. So we got President Pelosi, and evidently they are planning on going ahead and having a 2024 presidential election, which is good, because we all need to do that, but they're still trying to figure out how they're going to get this all organized. And it may turn out into a deal where we just have to go vote at our city hall. I think that's probably what it's going to end up being. And then all the votes are going to have to be collected and taken back. You know, all the results are going to have to be taken back to Washington. So we also have the other news that we at first thought that not the whole world had been affected by it. And that's true. There were a couple of places, for whatever reason, that didn't get hit really hard. And one of those places was in the African continent, like around Egypt, and I guess over Israel, kind of a strip. And it's weird because it's like a strip. It's like it got both sides, but it left a strip up the middle that didn't really get affected too much. So I don't know what that means, but that's what they're saying anyway. But the areas that are still good, that still have technology, they're not really able to provide any relief to the other parts of the world because they're just not that populated. They're kind of isolated now. They have pockets of electrical energy available to them, but they don't really have any way to spread it around or to share it. So what they've done, evidently, is they said, what we're going to do is we're going to try and get some ships back up and running. If you can tell us where your ship is that died off, maybe we can come do some repairs on it and make it so it's navigable. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know anything about these ships, but I know they're diesel engines, so I don't know what they're thinking about doing. But that would be nice if they could get shipping open again and we could start, getting some imports on stuff and exporting some stuff. Because as it turns out, we're going to have probably stuff that we will be able to export, like cars. I don't know how readily available parts are in other countries, but we've been pretty dang lucky here. We've actually found parts to fix some of these old cars, stockpiles of them. It's just new old stock that somebody stuck in a basement somewhere. Well, the stuff that was stuck down in the basements, a lot of that stuff didn't get fried. So we came across a bumper crop of points for vehicles, and that was the main thing we needed. So, somebody's looking out for us here. So we've got the things we need. We just don't have the extras. We don't have the frills. Oh, which reminds me, we also came across it was kind of funny. We came across a semi-truck on the side of the road. People had opened it up, and I guess they took one look and they just left it sitting there, but it was a truckload of books. And in the books that were in this truck, and we went and salvaged some of them, we brought some back. There was some, popular fiction and some nonfiction. We brought back a variety because, people need some kind of distraction these days. We don't have TV or radio anymore, really. So, so we brought back some of these books. We also found a case of Bibles in there, so we thought that was kind of, maybe somebody's trying to tell us something. So we brought the whole case of Bibles back anyway and passed them out. Anybody who needed a Bible, and the rest of them went to the library. So all these books that we brought back, we took down to the library. The library is doing a booming business. It hadn't been this busy since the 50s. And it's nice because we have an expanded library. They just put a new library in Marlow a few years ago, and it quadrupled the size of the stacks. And so now we've got room for all this stuff, and people are, reading again. And school, I got to tell you about school. So I think I told you back in October, we kind of adapted the curriculum to a more appropriate curriculum for the situation we're in now, which that was pretty awesome. We got all that done. And so the kids actually have been also doing some hands-on stuff instead of having 8 full class hours in the classroom, because it's kind of hard to manage when you don't have electricity, you don't have lights. They've been getting a lot of their studies done outside, or some of it's been at home, but a lot of it's actually been field trips since we've got the buses up and running. So we've been taking them here and taking them there. We got 3 dairies now going, full-fledged dairies in the area. So these kids are learning how to milk cows, how to make butter, and how to make cheese. So that's kind of interesting. Somebody somewhere had contacts, and they actually found a dairy farm that had some extra cows and a bull. So I was one of the people that went and hauled. I borrowed a stock trailer. Borrowed it, I say. I found it on the side of the road. Really nice stock trailer. So I went down and hauled back some of these cows. That was the first time I hauled live animals, and it was a little trippy because this is a not that heavy of a truck, and they were heavy cows. So we had a real slow trip, but we didn't have to go really far because it was just down by the Texas border. So it was 65, 70 miles. So, I made a few trips on those, bringing back milk cows. So we got these dairies set up, and we had to do a lot of horse trading to get them too, and I mean it. I mean, we had to trade some actual horse flesh and some other livestock to these people. They wanted to kind of go into another area with their cattle herd. They had pretty much solely dairy cows. Well, dairy cows are so valuable now, and well, so are meat cattle. But they wanted to start some Angus meat cattle herd, so we kind of hauled some Angus down for them in payment for the milk cows. So everybody's getting the best of both worlds here. So it's really, you know, the community's starting to kind of redevelop an economic base, and it's really good to see. So what we've kind of done too is we've started using money again, and we just use it locally. So we figured, why not? We don't have to have the government telling us we can use it. We can go ahead, because a lot of us had money. You know, we didn't have a whole bunch, but we had some, and it was a shame not to be able to use it. So we just started, you know, accepting money as payment for some things. Nothing very big, you know, but small stuff. So we started doing that, and now we've got kind of a booming economy. Our bank is reopened. It's the only bank in town, the one I bank at, which the other one, you know, they just decided they didn't have enough business for 2 banks yet, so they're kind of waiting their turn. They didn't think of it in time. So my bank got open first, and which was kind of nice, because that meant I had access to my money that I had in that bank. So we can still write checks and stuff. They just keep it limited to what they have locally as far as, you know, the cash back in it, and they had quite a bit. So so they're in good shape. So it's a local bank, and they've figured out a way to communicate with their other branches. They've got couriers, so if they need a little more of this here, a little more of that there, they just get their couriers to go do it. Nobody knows who they are, because they don't run in armored cars anymore. They just drive whatever old pickup or whatever. But you know, it works. And trying to think of what other news, because there was something else that was really big that came out of that newsletter from DC. Oh shoot, what was it? Oh, I remember now. All the liberal, the socialists that were in Congress, the squad and all them, they picked up and left. They left town. They decided, I guess they decided they better leave or something. I don't know what they did, but they all left. They woke up one morning, I guess, and took a head count on how many of them were still in town, because Congress was getting ready to go back in session or something, and like 60 people were missing. And some of the guys had left and come back to their homes to check on their families and stuff. They found ways to get back home, and then they went back to finish out their terms. Some of them took their families with them, I guess. They came and got their families and took them back to DC with them. What they're saying too is DC's a ghost town. Everybody left. There was no food there. There was nothing there that they could sustain themselves with. So everybody left DC proper. So it makes me wonder where my sister's at, because she was in Arlington, Virginia, right across the river. So they may be doing better over in Virginia. Didn't sound like they vacated, but I guess Washington, D.C. itself is just a ghost town. I guess you can go see the Smithsonian, because they left the doors unlocked, and they just bugged out. So all these government employees weren't getting paid anymore, and you know, there wasn't any food going into Washington, so they went back to wherever they were from, I guess. Just packed their stuff and walked on out. So things have changed a lot. Things have changed a whole lot. We don't get regular communiques from the government. That's the only news we've had out of them. We did get a similar newsletter out of Norman, Oklahoma, where they do all the weather stuff, and they basically said our system is out of service at this time, but we will update you if we figure out a way to get these things up and running again. But we want you to know that we're still keeping an eye on things, and if we find a way to do it, we will let you know. what we know about any bad weather that's coming this way or something. I mean, it was kind of pitiful in a way because, you know, they've got all the radar and stuff up there. Well, evidently they're trying to get that back up and running, so I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but maybe they can, I don't know, build a generator from scratch that'll run it. I don't know. Maybe that's what they got in mind, but they're working on it. They're trying because they realize we need some kind of weather. And since there are some ham radios left, they're kind of spotty all over the country. I think somebody took a count like maybe a month or two ago, just trying to get everybody to check in who's got a ham radio. And I think over just the continental U.S., I think there were like 3,000 or 4,000 of them. So there are a lot of ham radios. These guys are pretty sharp. They know how to rebuild stuff when it gets screwed up, and they must be savvy enough to be figuring out how to power them somehow, whether they're running them off batteries or what. I assume they probably are. I don't know. But it's kind of interesting. And oh, there was something else too. Oh, refrigeration. Yeah, I was going to tell you about that. So Bill figured out a way to hook up these freezers, chest freezers, to a propane drip system to actually keep stuff cold. And he wasn't sure that it was going to work, but it actually does work. So now he's got all these guys out in the barn. He cleaned out all of his other stuff out of the barn to get it out of the way, and he turned it into a freezer factory. So he's going out and getting all these old freezers, these chest freezers that, you know, are no good to anybody anymore. We all cleaned out our chest freezers as soon as we knew what was going on and cooked as much of this meat as we could and then canned it, what we had jars to can it with. And the rest of it, we just, you know, tried to keep it as long as we could. And some people tried salting it. Some people were a little successful, some people not so much. But we tried different ways of preserving it. But we did can up quite a bit of meat before it had a chance to go bad. Because, I mean, we knew we had to get this stuff done. And that was one of the things that kind of delayed Bill coming to look for me too, because all the neighborhood ladies got together and were canning up stuff. So Bill and the other guys, and I didn't know about all this, you know, when he came and got me. I learned about all this later, but they gathered up all the canning jars that they could find right offhand and lids and stuff. And some of the ladies got together and canned up as much of that meat as they could, and then they divvied it back out to everybody. So it was kind of a neat deal. It kept us going for a couple of months just on that, just what we had in our freezers, which we lost a lot of it, but we just didn't have enough canning jars to do it all. But we also ended up having kind of a big feast because we were trying to eat it all up. So we didn't just plunge right into hunger. You know, we had a great big feast first. So, I mean, it was kind of crazy because we had it like a community deal. You know, everybody got together and picked up as many of their neighbors as they could, those of us who had vehicles, and carried the food down to town. And we had it at the Senior Citizen Center at the park that had tables and everything set up, and everybody showed up. And we had, oh my gosh, we had everything from ham, turkey, roast beef, hamburgers, hot dogs, you name it. Anything that could be frozen, chicken, all the stuff that was salvaged, you know, that couldn't be canned, we took down there, and everybody just ate until they were stuffed, and then they took home the leftovers. So it, you know, it didn't go to waste. You know, we lost some of it, but as much as we could get, you know, before it went bad, we cooked it up and used it. So, but anyway, so Bill's got a freezer conversion factory going out here in the back, and he's got some young guys out there doing the work. He's just kind of checking everything, make sure they got the idea. And so what he's doing too is he's kind of opened a school for refrigeration guys, for LP refrigeration guys. So that's what we have to work with until they get the electricity back up and running, if they ever do. So that's kind of a cool thing. So now we actually have a refrigerator or a freezer in the house that works. And we actually have a refrigerator in the house that works too, because we had a travel trailer at the lake that had a propane refrigerator in it. And we just ended up taking it out of the trailer and bringing it to the house. So, you know, I actually used the old refrigerator. I got a nice stainless steel refrigerator with, like, you know, it's got refrigerator on one side and freezer on the other, what it used to have. So we basically gutted it and put shelves in it, and I use it as a little pantry, you know, for storing stuff in. I moved it into the laundry room because I just took the washer and dryer and set them outside. They weren't doing us any good anymore. Can't run them without some kind of power, and I wasn't going to waste power on washing clothes when I can do that by hand. So we just hauled those out and moved the refrigerator in there, and we use it for pantries. I finally got my pantry in the utility room that I wanted. I just didn't get it exactly the way I thought I would. So, I mean, things have improved a lot. So we've got refrigeration, we've got coal oil lamps, or oil lamps anyway. And I actually came across a stock of coal oil in a little town. Gosh, where was it? I think it was down by Bowie, Texas. I got that far. Oh yeah, that's where it was. It was down in there. And I found it was like a 5 and dime store that had been closed for years. It was just like an abandoned building, and I got poking around in there because everybody's just, you know, nobody's like watching over stuff anymore. Everybody goes and scavenges whatever they can, and everybody's just like, yeah, well, if you can find something you use, have at it. That's kind of the prevailing theory now. Unless somebody's got something really valuable, then they might guard it, you know. But so I was poking around in this old 5 and dime building, and I found a stockpile of lamp oil, and it looked like it was from when I was a kid because it was all different colors and different scents, but it was in the old glass bottles. And so when I was a kid, we used to buy that, and we had little bitty decorative lamps. We put some in, you know, you could have your little, it was like a throwback to, you know, the last generation or whatever, kind of a toy size deal. That must have been what those were for, because they weren't giant bottles, but there were like 700 bottles of that stuff. Not that many actually, but there were a bunch of bottles of it. So I brought all that back, and people were like, people were like fighting over that. It's like, yes, I want some. I'm like, I don't have enough for everybody, but we'll have to split it off and bring a bottle, and we'll half these up, and you know. So everybody got a little bit of it that could come up with something to put it in anyway. So everybody was glad to have that. Because as it turns out, I'm not the only person who used to collect oil lamps. And another thing I found in the same store was wicks. We found a bunch of wicks, and we actually found some of those little lamps, some of the little toy ones. So we went ahead and brought those back. I mean, I don't know what they're really practical for, but they are a little bit of light. If you want a night light or something for a bit, you know, like before you go to bed, then you can blow it out. So, and one of the things we found out this winter was that the chickens do fine without the heat lamp in the hen house. Amazingly enough, we have not lost one chicken, knock on wood. They've just gone on, they don't even know anything ever happened. They don't care. They're ruled by the sun and the moon anyway. The sun comes up, they wake up. The sun goes down, they go to sleep, and they wake themselves up, put themselves to bed. So we just open the coop door and let them in and out. You know, that's about all we have to do with them. So they're all getting along just fine. And then, of course, we got the calves out in the pasture. They've been eating pretty good since it warmed up enough, and stuff started coming back up again. It turns out they like blue stem pretty good. We got a lot of blue stem on the place. Trying to think of what else really amazing has happened. Oh, I can tell you what amazing has happened. Some guy down in Texas got some old airplanes to fly, and so now we've got some people flying airplanes around again, and it's the bizarrest thing because you won't see one for days or weeks, and then all of a sudden you'll see an airplane fly over. We haven't seen any helicopters yet, but we have seen the airplanes. But it turns out some guy down there, I guess he had like a bunch of classic old planes at this airfield, and he was able to get enough fuel to fuel them, and he actually flew them to another airstrip that he had been flying to before all this happened, and he set it up on that end where he's got fuel there, and he did this all over the country evidently, so he's got like hopscotch and airstrips that he can fly to and refuel. So, you know, who knows? Maybe he'll start doing airmail or something. I don't know. It's pretty heavy. Probably wouldn't want to put that in his plane, but it's kind of neat that there's some kind of semi-modern mode of transport left. It's not all just motorcycles and horses and old beater cars. So that's kind of neat. I thought that was pretty neat anyway. Got kind of excited over that. So one of the things we found out, here's some of the bad stuff that's happened. I'm trying to focus on the positive because, you know, that's what you do. But there have been some bad things that happened. We had some kind of a flu or something went through here. Nobody thought it was COVID. It didn't act like that. It just acted like the flu, and it might have been something akin to the Spanish flu. And we lost quite a few people to that, so that was bad. And that was in January, I think, when it hit here really hard. And so we kind of had a rash of flu deaths. We've had a couple of situations where people got hurt, and it was like traumatic injury, and we just couldn't get them to a trauma level hospital because there's no such thing anymore. So that didn't turn out so hot. And we think, what else? Oh, a big one. I guess one of the old hospitals over in Lawton burnt to the ground. Somebody went in there and set it on fire, I guess, and just watch it burn, and it did. So that burnt down. It wasn't like a big loss because they weren't using it by that time anyway. They had salvaged all the good stuff out of it. And, you know, they did pretty much what we did over here in Marlow and Duncan. They got all the equipment out of there that was useful and had the doctors decide who got it, you know, who gets the hospital bed, who have we got needs to go into a nursing home or coming out of a nursing home and needs, you know. So they did kind of a similar deal over there. I think that's pretty much all the really bad stuff. We didn't have anybody starve. Everybody was plenty hungry a lot of the time, but nobody starved to death. And I attribute that to everybody looking out for the people next door to them. And, you know, that's one of those deals. You start that up and everybody's doing that, then it's really hard to overlook somebody. So we're not out of the woods yet. I mean, we're still eating a lot of beans and stuff, which we run across a few stores of food in the oddest places, like dried food and stuff, but that's not going to last forever. At some point, that's all going to get found and used and consumed. So we're in the process of growing as much as we can now, which is why we're all in gardening mode. But one of the things we've all noticed is, we're just feeling better. Our health is better. We're walking a lot. We're not riding everywhere we go. Even with the truck, I don't just ride the truck and drive to town every day or something. I go out once a week. The rest of the time I'm walking around the farm taking care of livestock and taking care of the garden and stuff, doing the wash. I've gotten to be pretty good at washing clothes, and I actually, that's kind of funny, I actually have a little old-fashioned scrubbing board that, like they used to use in a basin of water. Well, guess who went back to that? I do my laundry now out in the yard. I was trying to do it in the bathtub, and it was just too much of a mess. It was a big pain in the butt. So I had Bill set me up an actual clothesline, which is kind of ironic. I'd just been talking to him right before all this happened, wanting a clothesline in the yard. And so he finally put one in for me. But what I do now is I do laundry the old-fashioned way. I build a fire out in the yard, and I heat my water that way. It's a lot easier than heating it on the stove, and I'm not using, propane for wash, because you have to heat a lot of water for wash. So I heat my water up in big galvanized deal, you know, not a bucket, oh, what do you call it? It's bigger than a bucket tub, in a tub. And I just heat that right over the fire and get it warm. I don't heat it till it's like super hot. And then I have Bill come help me get it moved over. We've got it rigged up with a couple of handles that we can get. I mean, I'm not talking about a tremendous amount of water here, but enough that we can move it once it's warmed up. At that point, I take it off the fire. I don't know what other people do, but I take it off there. And then I'll use the fire for something else, like I'll put a kettle of, you know, beans or something on it. If there's anything I can do to conserve the propane is probably a good idea, and it kind of tastes good when you cook outside. So, so on wash day, that's what I usually do. I'll go out and do my soap, and I've still got quite a bit of laundry soap. That was one of the things that we were able to actually find a kind of a cache of. So we distributed it to everybody in town. I came across a semi truck out on the interstate. It was full of laundry soap. I thought, you know, this is something we're going to wish we had here in another, you know, few months, because we're all going to be out and we're still going to have dirty clothes. So I loaded up as much as I could get and brought it back to town. And that's just what I do once a week now. Basically, I go out and scavenge and see what I can find. And, you know, I take people with me. I don't go by myself. My nephew usually goes, and he usually rides shotgun, just because we've had a few incidents now of people going back to their wicked ways. You remember I was telling you about the guys in the jail? I think last October I was telling you about that. The guys in the jail that we had to basically let them out because it was uninhabitable. You couldn't leave people in there no matter how bad they were. We probably should have just left one guy in there. The other guy actually turned out to be a useful guy, and he's now a veterinary assistant to one of our local vets. Turns out the guy that assaulted, whoever it was he assaulted, I can't even remember now, but turns out he was drinking when he did it, and he gave up the booze, and he likes animals, so he went to work for one of the vets, and so he's actually turned into a really good member of the community. The other guy, we actually hanged him. He was the one who had killed his wife, and he went after another girl, and she luckily got saved by some guy that heard something going on or whatever, but we caught the guy, and so we took him into town and we hanged him in the park. And so, you know, it's one of those things. He was warned, he agreed to it, and at that point we weren't going to let him go around hurting anybody else, because he hurt her pretty bad. I mean, he disfigured her, he cut her face real good, and he was on his way to killing her. So that was the end of that guy, so we don't have to worry about him anymore. And it sent a pretty good message to anybody else who was acting up, because we left the guy hanging in the park. He's still there, he's still hanging in the park. But, you know, extreme situations, extreme times, you have to do extreme things sometimes. It's not fun, and it's not nice, and it's not pretty, but at the same time, you know, we're isolated here. We only have the resources we've got, and we can't, you know, this guy was slated for prison for murder to begin with, so he got a little bit of a reprieve. He got to get out and run around for a couple months, but that's all he lasted. It wasn't 2 months, and we had to, you know, finish it. He couldn't even behave that long. But the other guy was, you know, he's like a stellar veterinarian assistant. He may actually become a vet himself once he gets through this. He's not very old. I mean, I think he's probably in his, you know, mid-20s maybe. But so we had one success and one fail. So, but we've had a few incidents of people coming around trying to loot, and we just chased them off. We were prepared for that. One of the things I did when I got back was I got hold of all the guys around that are, you know, cops now, and I'm a retired cop, so I just kind of got together with them and said, you know, we need to figure out some kind of a system to protect our vulnerable areas. And, you know, so we kind of worked out a plan. And I didn't contribute a whole lot to it. I just kind of urged them to kind of get the plan together. I figured it hasn't been so long since they were a cop. Their training is probably fresher in their mind than mine was in mine. But I did point out to them we probably needed to do like more of a community policing type of attitude with it, and not so much like, I'm the law in this town, because now we're on a personal level with everybody. It's not like our police are far removed, or so there had to be a better way to do it, and that seemed to work pretty well where I worked before. So I kind of urged them to do that, and they kind of did. They took it and ran with it. So I stay the hell out of their business now. I just go look for stuff, and but they had kind of a good security system in place, and people that tried to loot, we just chased them off, and it was like, come back and we'll hang you too. So I think there's quite a bit of that going on around the country. There are just a few bad eggs, there always have been, always will be. But they're going to prey on the areas that don't stand up for themselves. But once you establish that you're not going to put up with that kind of crap, then they pretty much go away. They go look for an easier target, which is good and it's bad. It's bad if they find an easier target, but it's good because you get them out of your hair. So, what do you do? That's the way it's always been. So one of the things that we got a local builder, and nobody's building new houses right now for obvious reasons. Nobody's got the materials. So we got a local builder who's been going around and revamping people's barns and making them more functional for the situation we've got now. So I'm not sure exactly what they're doing to all of them, because we don't have like a barn. We've got a barn, but it's more of a shop. And then we did build a lean-to out in the pasture for the hogs, and then another one for the cows to get in, cattle, the steers, to get in when it's bad or whatever, instead of just standing out and getting rained on or snowed on or whatever. So I don't know, half the time they don't even pay attention to that stuff anyway. They just stand out in it, and other times they'll get in there and lay down and go to sleep. So who knows what they're thinking? I don't know. I don't want to really spend too much time thinking about what they're thinking, because I'm going to eat them one day. I don't really want to. I don't want to, think about it that way. So a lot of people's attitudes have changed in a lot of ways. That's probably been the biggest thing, is adjusting our expectations back down to kind of the local microcosm level, instead of looking at everything with a worldwide perspective. Because at this point, what's going out there, it may be interesting to know, but it's not really affecting us, because nothing really gets in to our area from outside of our area yet. And then I'm sure at some point people will get the cities are still a mess, I guess. That's all the reports I've got. So it's still really hard to travel. Once you get into the cities, there's thousands and thousands of cars blocking every road, pretty much, because this happened, right at the height of rush hour for everybody, like from here east. And I guess it's just about as bad out west, but not quite. The farther east you go, I guess the worse it gets. But so the big cities are pretty much still impassable in a vehicle. So the farthest I've been from home since all this happened is about 200 miles. And I don't go much farther than that, because I can get back in a day. I don't go out and stay out overnight anymore at all. And I don't go out alone. So we'll go out and, drive 4 hours out or 5 hours out and 4 or 5 hours back, and that's it. But we go out, every week we take a different route and go see what we can learn. And one of the things that we've been doing is we've been kind of mapping things, which routes are open, which places are not. And at first when we started doing this, I had to actually have Bill put a winch on this truck, because we were still moving cars out of the road, so I could hook onto them with the winch and drag them out, so to make the road passable. And I didn't have to do it very much. but there were probably, I don't know, a couple dozen times I had to stop and move a car where two cars had died right next to each other or something. It was just not quite wide enough to get around them or whatever, so I'd grab the smallest one. I picked the smallest one and move it out of the way. So a lot of people have been doing stuff like that. A lot of the people that are out, you know, with trucks that survived are doing the same kind of thing. So we're slowly but surely clearing a lane of traffic in our areas, in our zones. And we kind of, I mean, I think there's about 15 people right now working in my zone that go out once a week or so. They're doing about what I do. And that's as far as we go. We don't go much farther. I've been tempted to go east. I haven't done it yet because I don't know the situation in the cities back there. That's one thing that President Pelosi's newsletter didn't tell us too much about. I mean, it did tell us about Washington, D.C. being pretty much cleared out, but it didn't really say anything about like New York City or Chicago or any of the other big cities, Houston, any of that. So I'm sure they don't know. They probably don't have any better intel on it than we do. Or if they do, they're keeping it to themselves. So I don't know how these cities are. So I'm avoiding cities until this all gets cleaned up enough to where there's some semblance of, I don't know, law and order, I guess, farther out. I'm sure as things open up and we get adjusted to this and adapted, then things will get going, you know, and law enforcement will be able to get back into action in a wider and a broader range of areas. I imagine that there's a lot of state troopers that would like to get back to work, and some of them are still working, I'm sure. Ones that, you know, anybody who had a badge when this started, I'm sure is out there, you know, working because people are asking them to. You know, we still have to have law and order. So, you know, and like in our town, we facilitated getting vehicles for them. We couldn't come up with a bunch, but we got enough, and then, you know, horses, of course. So it's going to be a slow process rebuilding all this stuff. But as far as the electrical grid, I think that's cooked. I think that's going to be a thing of the past. The nationwide grid, I think that's done. It may come back in 100 years, who knows. But what we have to do now is we have to basically open new factories to build the components to rebuild them, because all the transformers, all that stuff that was actually built, evidently China did get hit. So all the parts that were sitting over there got fried too. So, you know, what do? And we don't have the factories here anymore to do that. So that's something we need to do. I hope somebody's doing it. You know, that's one of the things we've been waiting to hear news on, is anybody actually starting to rebuild this stuff. Because without the transformers and stuff, we can't get the grid back up. And, you know, we've heard of a few pockets where they did actually harden their systems so their local power is functional, but they had problems where it attached into the grid. So what they're having to do now, they don't really have these systems back up and running yet, because what they're having to do is they're having to close their systems, take them completely out of the grid. So they're going out to all these areas and somehow terminating, I'm not sure what they have to do, but they terminate the line so that the power in their grid doesn't flow outward anymore. It restricts it to their area. But I guess that's taken them a long time to do, because they're having to do all this stuff manually. They don't have any bucket trucks or anything anymore. They're having to climb the poles with cleats like they used to, like my dad used to do, like Bill's dad used to do, with spikes. You know, they put on spike cleats and climb the poles. So it's kind of an interesting deal. Once they get that done, they say that they'll be able to get these systems up and running. I think Marlow, our electric, they actually hardened their grid. So this is where I'm getting that information. It's from the local electrical guys, the city guys that are working on the electricity. They've just got so much they've got to tie off loose ends. You wouldn't be amazed how many ways the grid is tied in. It's tied in this way and that way and another way. So they have to find all this stuff before they can even try to power it up. They're afraid if they don't completely isolate it, when they power it up, it'll just short it out because of the components are blown out all around here. So, and I don't know if they're right or not, but that's what I'm hearing. So we'll see. At this point, I'm not too worried about having electricity anytime soon. It would be nice to get some back. I mean, and I think it's going to be a deal where it's not just a household thing so much, because it's going to be kind of expensive probably for them to generate all the power themselves. I'm not even sure how they're going to do it. But they've got a little power plant in town, but I'm not sure if it's a water. I'm not sure how they generate it. I never have actually paid that much attention. I ought to find out. But I think what they'll do is they'll probably go through, all the meters have to be changed out too. That's another thing. All the meters all the smart meters they put in not too long ago, they all got fried. So they got to go back and salvage the old meters that they pulled out. Luckily, they salvaged a bunch of them. So they can hook up the critical areas with electricity, like, you know, hospitals, clinics, stuff like that. They can go through and start rebuilding the infrastructure that way. So, and you know, they'll decide who gets electricity based on, I guess, public safety and you know, basically kind of like communal need to start out with. Once they get it all built back up, maybe it'll expand a little bit and we can all have electricity again, but I ain't counting on it. So we'll see how that goes. But for now, we're doing pretty good. We're not out of the woods, I don't think. A lot of it's going to depend on how much food we can grow this summer, because things are still pretty lean. I mean, we're getting by. We're eking out a living, as they used to say, and that's about all we're doing food-wise. But you know, a lot of people have gone into food production now that hadn't before. One of the things I'm going to learn how to do is I'm going to start trading something for milk, maybe trading eggs or something for milk, and I'm going to try and learn how to make cheese. I think cottage cheese is pretty easy to make, and man, some cottage cheese would be pretty good right now. I haven't had that in a while. Probably won't be having any for a while too. So things like that, you know, people are branching out and trying to figure out a lot of food production. That's our main focus right now: food production and food preservation. Those are our two big industries right now. Everything else is secondary. So a lot of the stuff that I'm out looking for when I'm out scouting around for stuff is stuff that might help. Jars, canning jars are a huge deal. You'd think there'd be cajillions of canning jars in this country, and there are, but you wouldn't believe how many canning jars it takes to feed a lot of people. It takes cajillions of them. So I'm always on the lookout for that. Useful tools, like construction tools, saws, old-fashioned hand saws, those are at a premium right now because nobody can run their circular saws. Any kind of a manually operated saw is a big deal. It's basically rebuilding the toolkit with all the tools that, like, my grandpa would have had before they started relying on electrical tools for everything. So that's the kind of stuff I've been out hunting. That and food, of course, any kind of food. If I find food, I take the food. That's just kind of how it works. And then I've got a pretty good collection of cargo trailers. I've been collecting them and dragging them out in the pasture and parking them along the property line for storage. You know, we need to store stuff like jars, all the stuff I'm finding. We got to have a place to put it, and I don't want it all in the house. So I'm just bringing home cargo trailers, and we use them for storage for the stuff I find that's the non-perishable stuff. You know, and then I can, every once in a while, I'll get everybody together up here and we'll divvy up what I got. Make sure everybody who needs something has got it, or if somebody's looking for something, they'll just come over and ask. see what I got. I'll go look through the trailers. It's all out there. Everything I got's out there. So that's kind of turned out to be a deal. Then I never thought I'd be running like a flea market out of the the back pasture. But that's what it's turned into. So, you know, and everybody's figured out some little niche that they can fill, you know. And but I'm getting to the point now where I'm not sure how long I'm going to want to do this, so I want to branch out in a couple of areas. I want to learn how to make cheese, and I want to probably go into the butter making business too. But I want to do this, but I don't want to own the milk cows to do it. So I've got to figure out something that I can barter for the milk to do this stuff with, because you got to have the milk. And then I've got to track down enzymes for cheese making. You've got to have certain enzymes. I'm going to have to figure that out. I got to run to the library and read up on that. So I'm probably like a year or two away from even trying that. I've got to figure it out. Fortunately, I've got a lot of books of my own, so I got some cookbooks and stuff. I might find useful stuff in there. I don't know. You know, we're just making do as best we can, and getting along as best we can. And I'm pretty sure everybody everywhere is doing the same thing. This is not to say that we haven't had casualties. We've lost a lot of people with this deal. In our particular area, nobody's starved to death, but I'm hearing reports all over the country of a lot of people starving to death, in the cities particularly. They were just kind of stuck there. You know, they had X amount of food available, and then it was all gone, and, you know, there they were. So it's pretty awful, And so ironically enough, I mean, it's kind of gruesome, but one of the businesses that's kind of blossomed out of this is the undertaking industry. We don't have a lot of big machinery left that works, but we do have a couple of backhoes. For some reason, it didn't affect them the way it affected the other stuff. I mean, so somebody down at the Marlow Cemetery decided that they were going to go try the backhoe, and it started. I don't know what saved it. Could have been that it was in a metal building down there. I don't know. But so we haven't had to resort to hand digging graves. That's one really good thing, because I don't know how people would do that. I mean, just the energy expense that it takes to do that in the ground we've got is very hard. So to dig a 6-foot grave, I mean, my grandpa's dad did it. He dug graves and buried everybody, but I don't know how deep he buried them. That's the thing. So we've managed to keep from having like a bunch of bodies laying around, but I don't know what they're doing in the cities, and I'm sure I don't really want to know too much about it, because I think it's going to be a little grim. Just because, you know, so many people, and they can't really take cars to get out of the city, so they've got to walk out and then try and figure out what they're going to do and where they're going to go. And we haven't had anybody showing up here really from the city. We've had some other, you know, people from, you know, farms and stuff come in here and move in, but we haven't really had any city people come in, and we're not that far from Oklahoma City. We're only 70 miles, so I don't know what's going on up there. I hate to think about it. But we know there's some signs of life in Norman anyway, since the weather people send out that newsletter. And it's funny how they send out these newsletters, because it's obvious that they're finding people with printing presses and then distributing them across, you know, the country, and then they send out people with stacks of them to go pass them out. So somebody came across, you know, all the stuff they needed to do that, ink and a manual printing press and whatever. And they're kind of crude looking, which is kind of funny. It almost looks like something Benjamin Franklin would have printed out, and I guess it kind of is in a way. So there's that. But somebody up in Norman is doing okay, evidently. So I don't know. Maybe they kind of hunkered down up there at the college or something. I don't know. But, I mean, if anybody would have known what was going on, it would have probably been them. I don't know if they would have had any instruments to measure what was happening, but I bet they would have. So they probably actually knew right when it happened. They actually did mention it in the newsletter. They said they are, you know, pretty sure that's what it was a solar flare that took out our entire grid. Now the good thing out of all of this was over in Russia, Nancy did say something about that. President Pelosi, I should say, not just call her Nancy, but she in her newsletter, she did say that she had word from Ukraine and that the war in Ukraine was over. Evidently, when it hit, it took out all of their technology too, so pretty much ended the battlefield right there where it sat. And evidently the Russians retreated back to Russia, and the Ukrainians, you know, were just like, good riddance, get gone. It took them evidently a while to figure out what was going on, but so that was kind of an interesting little item. That didn't even make the front page though, because that's like, you know, and I'm not even sure how she got that. I imagine some super secret spy channel or something. But she was glad to pass that information along. So nobody seems to have heard a peep out of China since it happened. So we're not sure how bad it hit them. We know it hit them, but we don't know how bad. And I don't know, we're just getting along as best we can. So that's pretty much all I know. That's about all I can tell you about it right now. I'll check back in with you in another 6 months or so and update you from here. That's pretty much all I got. Talk to you later.